It's the Ole One Two. It's the Ole One Two. It's the Ole One Two Wrestling Podcast. It's the Ole One Two. It's the Ole One Two. It's the Ole One Two Wrestling Podcast.
How's it going, everybody? This is Jacob Grondy here reporting for WrestlingWithWrestling.com on the Ole One Two Pro Wrestling Podcast, episode 18. It's Wrestlemania season, guys. I'm pretty excited about it. I've just found myself wanting to talk about wrestling, not necessarily Wrestlemania, even though we do get into that on the podcast. So I did find two guests who are columnists, fellow podcasters, people that just like to talk about wrestling just like me, to jump on the show this week. We have Adam Contant from The Wrestling Show. I just did his show, episode 86 of The Wrasslun Show. We talk about the Elgin Ibushi powerbomb spot from New Japan Cup, Callahan bad shot right to Eddie Edwards' face. Pretty fun conversation. We also talk about Hulk Hogan, things that got him into wrestling, and his The Wrasslun Show network. And for the second interview on the show today, I talked to Rich Laconi of ROHworld.com and the Running Wild podcast. I had a fun time talking to him. We chat everything from Austin Aries to Adam Bomb. Had a really good conversation. And without further ado, here is Adam Contant from The Wrasslun Show. How's it going, everybody? This is Jay Grondy here for the Ole One Two Pro Wrestling Podcast. And my guest today is host of The Wrasslun Show, producer of The Wrasslun Show Network, Adam Contant. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Jacob. Thank you so much for having me on the Ole One Two. Big fan of the show, and I can't wait to talk a little wrestling today.
For sure. Now, you when we were talking yesterday, when I was on your show, The Wrasslun Show, you mentioned a lot of stuff from the 80s and everything. Was that the era you jumped into being a fan?
I was first exposed to professional wrestling when I was very young. In fact, I even remember my first match. It was an episode of WWF Superstars back in 1991. And I remember I was watching the world's strongest man, Dino Bravo, who I think by that time had gone back to just being Canada's strongest man. I don't remember the enhancement talent he was facing, but I remember just being in absolute awe of these giant, muscle-bound, living, breathing superheroes. And then, of course, Hulk Hogan came out to cut a promo, and that was it, baby. I bled red and yellow for the rest of my days. So, yeah, I definitely grew up within the rock and wrestling era, but the people who exposed me to the business, my father, my uncles, I watched the stuff that they watched. So I was big into 80s wrestling. One of my favorite pay-per-views of all time was the first pay-per-view that I ever got to see was Survivor Series 1989. Now, that's not to say that I'm not a fan of the current product. I was actually a really big fan of the Ruthless Aggression era, and I know that's not a popular opinion comparatively to something like, say, the Attitude Era or even the current Reality Era product. But ever since I was a little kid, I would just consume professional wrestling like candy. And it's an obsession that I just still can't kick to this very day. I've had an opportunity to actually step inside the ring. I've had a chance to ring announce, and I currently do play-by-play and color commentary for some local promotions here in Northern Ontario, Northland Wrestling and Rock Solid Wrestling. So, you know, there's never been a time in my life when the business has not been a huge impact on me. So it's a bit of a cop-out answer, and I apologize, but I love all eras of professional wrestling, but I'd be lying if I said that the rock and wrestling era of the 1980s doesn't hold a particularly favorable place in my heart.
How old were you in 91? Yeah.
In 1991, I would have been 7 years old. So I started fairly young. I'll be 34 in June. So that should give you an idea of my age range. But for me, it doesn't matter the era. A good match is a good match.
For sure, no doubt. And I just have to ask, since Hogan kind of drew you in, you would be 12 years old in 1996 when he made the turn, went NWO, but you seem to be a big WWF fan. Were you a fan of the NWO since, that's kind of your pre-teens, where you kind of started liking the bad guys? Or what did you feel at the time when he not only jumped ship to WCW, but then jumped to NWO?
At that time, I would have been 12, 13, 14, just getting to that period where you're not quite a kid, but you're not really an adult yet. You're just kind of in between. The hormones were running wild, brother, as the Hulkster would say. And I think every young adult male in that time period was at some point a fan of the NWO. Now, the funny thing is that, I'm from Canada, up here in the Great White North, we didn't have a lot of exposure to the WCW product unless, you were lucky like my grandmother and got access to TBS and got cable. So I really wasn't exposed to the WCW product till they got a deal with TSN in 1998, I believe. Now, don't get me wrong. I still got to see snippets of WCW and I still got to see some of their shows and stars. But I remember watching clips of a Nitro that my father had from something he had taped where they were showing the Bash at the Beach finale where Hogan made the most shocking turn in professional wrestling history. And I couldn't believe it. But I also thought, man, that's really interesting and fascinating. So it's weird. Being a young adult Canadian wrestling fan during the Attitude Era was an interesting time, to say the least. But yeah, of course, I think that there's no prepubescent boy out there who was a wrestling fan during that era that didn't at one point say, yeah, man, I'm down with the NWO for life.
For sure. And then going any further, you said you were a fan of the Ruthless Aggression era. What did you think of around that time, Mr. America, Hulk Hogan's gimmick with the mask and everything?
I'm going to let you in on a little secret that everybody knows. I love goofy comedy stuff for professional wrestling. I know the old saying, funny doesn't equal money, and I agree with that to a certain extent, but I believe it has its place. So to see Hulk Hogan come out with the mask on and do the Mr. America stuff, I thought it was hilarious. I was entertained by the whole thing. And it also allowed him to kind of be a little bit more like the Hulk Hogan that I grew up idolizing and watching. He was back to being kind of hokey and over the top and say your vitamins and or eat your vitamins and say your prayers. And so it was a little bit of a nostalgia kick for me. So was it goofy and hokey? Absolutely. Did I love every minute of it? You better believe it. Nice.
And, since you didn't get a lot of exposure to WCW, but, of course, the network and everything, they've been showing all the old Mid-Atlantic episodes and everything like that. What have you been catching those? Have you seen the older WCW stuff?
The network itself is a embarrassment of riches for a wrestling fan, and I have had a chance to go back and watch a lot of the Mid-Atlantic stuff. I've also been trying to binge watch a lot of world-class championship wrestling, essentially anything I could get my hands on. I think I'm working through a couple Maple Leaf Gardens shows right now, but it's been a wonderful not only trip down memory lane for some of the stuff that I do remember growing up as a kid, but it's also been a great history lesson for someone who didn't grow up with the Jimmy Crockett promotions or, for example, the Mid-South stuff, the UWF. But it's been really wonderful to go back and research that and see all of the great stuff that these guys have done that I never really got a chance to be exposed to. I'll give you a great example that kind of comes back to it. Being a WWF kid and growing up in Canada without much exposure to WCW, Ric Flair wasn't a big deal to me because I only knew him from his 91-92 run with the company. So when he came back in 2001 to the company, I really didn't understand what the big deal was with Ric Flair. And of course, once they bought the WCW library and we got to see more of his stuff, they put out the Ric Flair DVD and they had the Classics on Demand channel, which was kind of a precursor to the network. And I finally got to go back and see, oh my God, this guy really is as great as everybody said he was. But you have to think, if your only exposure to Ric Flair was that brief stint in the early 90s with the WWF and then the later dying days of WCW, where he really wasn't treated all that well, you would have kind of an interesting perspective on Ric Flair, where you only got to see him not at the height of his career. So that gives you an example of the ways that the network and the on-demand programming before it really made a huge impact on me as a wrestling fan, because it allowed me some exposure to stuff that I didn't really have before, and it's all been really wonderful.
Sure. And kind of jumping back a little bit, you are a fan, you were a fan. How did you go from just being a fan to producing everything on the Wrasslun Show Network?
You know what? I would say that it comes from just learning little bits and pieces here and there. I mean, as you can tell from this conversation, I like to talk, and I do work in radio for a living. That's my day job that helps pay for the Wrasslun Show Network. So the more I learned in the radio industry, the more I started to think that maybe this was something that I could do outside of work that allowed me to focus on my passion, which of course is professional wrestling. So a lot of it came from the real world and learning my job from the technical aspect. From a content perspective, my God, I could talk about wrestling till the cows come home. And in fact, the Wrasslun Show itself, the OG podcast, the podfather, if you will, of our network, it started off by me and my regular co-host, Matt Sukram, having long conversations at the radio station about the world of professional wrestling. And one day, just saying, you know what? We really should just sit down for about 30 minutes every week and just kind of record this, because that would be kind of fun. I'd also like to state for the record, I'm also a bit of a cinephile, which is a big reason why I decided to create the show Ropes to Reels on our network that combines the world of professional wrestling and movies. And being a cinephile, Kevin Smith was a huge inspiration for me. He was the first guy that I really ever followed that started his own podcast network with Smodcast. And I would be lying if I didn't say that I took huge inspiration from him with the mindset of creating not just a podcast, but multiple podcasts that I could share with my friends and the world. So I think those were probably the two biggest influences: the radio industry itself from the technical aspect, and from an inspirational and content perspective, I got to give it up to Kevin Smith, Mr. Clerks himself.
That's cool. That's all. So you gotta definitely, since you're a wrestling fan and a movie buff, especially movies like that Kevin Smith would produce, you probably are into the cult classic Ready to Rumble. Are you a fan of this movie?
It's funny because in our most recent episode of Ropes to Reels, we reviewed a Japanese film, Gachi Boy, Wrestling with a Memory, and I went on about a 5-10 minute rant at the end of the episode talking about how I feel like it's kind of the anti-Ready to Rumble, because whereas Ready to Rumble just kind of portrays wrestling fans in a less than favorable light, Gachi Boy really gets to the heart of what it means to be a real fan. But I also went on to defend Ready to Rumble and saying that I know that it's a terrible movie, but it's also one of my absolute favorites of all time. Oh. Not just because it has to do with wrestling, but because it's one of the most quotable films I've ever seen. And if anybody is interested, we haven't reviewed it yet, and I'm probably going to save that one for an episode 100 spot. That's going to be a big one to review.
For sure, yeah, that's your Wrestlemania right there.
Absolutely.
But we were talking kind of after the interview yesterday about what we were going to talk about on this show, and I kind of we mentioned that there's two spots in particular, these botched spots that happened on these main events of these shows that kind of created a lot of buzz. Just jumping right into it, the first one happened about 2 weeks ago on Impact. Eddie Edwards versus Sami Callihan. Sami Callihan opens a chair, sets it on top of Eddie's chest, and then tries to fire a baseball bat on the chair. It does clip the chair, but then on the way down, strikes Eddie Edwards in the eye, really fucking up his eye. He had to go to the hospital, but to his credit, he cuts a promo on the way to the ambulance and then gets there the next day to wrestle. Cassius Ohno has spoken out saying that this wouldn't happen in the WWE. Jim Cornette, of course, really shoots on Callihan here about this spot. So it's really controversial. Have you seen the spot? What do you think of the spot?
I did see it, and what I think of it is it's absolutely brutal. It's vicious. In fact, it was a big inspiration for me and Andrew Kent to create our most recent We Have Till 5 podcast, the most gruesome injuries in pro wrestling, which is going to be going up next Friday on March the 16th. So you can have a listen to that one. We did put the Eddie Edwards bat injury on our list of potential top 5 slots that we have our fans vote on every week. You'll have to tune in to see if it made it, but it certainly was worthy of a place in the top 5, I think. I think it's been a long time since we've seen an injury that gruesome on network television. Now, as for the controversy, guys like Jim Cornette have a point. This isn't the kind of spot that you would see allowed in the WWE, and it likely could have been prevented. Now, to be fair to Callahan as well, it did look like a freak accident. It did look, and like, let's be honest, no matter what the stunt is, there's an element of danger. You know, we're so used to seeing table spot. I cringe every time that Randy Orton gives a back body drop to one of the Singh brothers, because I really honestly think like he's trying to cripple them now at this point, because not only do they love doing that spot, but it seems like every time they do it, he gets closer and closer to landing those guys on top of their neck. Now, maybe that's just because he's been in the business for so long and he's damn good at what he does. But it's scary. There's always an element of risk no matter what the stunt is. You know, we sit there and we talk about, you know, Jim Cornette or another personality may say, you know, this could have been prevented. It was a needless stunt and it wouldn't have happened in the WWE. Yeah, but at the same time, you know, you have Shane McMahon jumping off the Hell in a Cell, and that's really kind of a needless stunt. Now, again, in WWE's defense, though, there were crash pads underneath that table. It was clearly a prepared and practiced kind of stunt, whereas the Callahan-Edwards thing looked like it was kind of just an idea. Maybe they practiced it. I don't know. Do I think that it was preventable? I mean, sure. Any stunt is preventable. Just don't do it. But clearly, Edwards and Callahan had enough faith in one another that they thought they could go out there and do the spot successfully. That didn't happen, and it's a very unfortunate situation. And I think maybe it should be a lesson moving forward that precautions like that should be taken. I don't know if for example, I know I might take some heat for saying this, but, you know, was the bat gimmicked and could it have been gimmicked? Now, mind you, rubber bats can still hurt a lot because the rubber that they used for those props are very heavy. But I don't think it would have done the same kind of damage if maybe they had taken that extra step and gotten a prop back, for example. So, you know, it's not an easy answer. There's not a black and white answer to that sort of thing. I think it was just an accident, but I also think they could have been better prepared.
For sure. Did you see the shirt?
I did not see the shirt.
Oh, they have a shirt. They paying homage to the I broke Wahoo's leg and the 0-3-16, where it just says Sami Callahan, I broke Eddie Edwards' eye with a baseball bat, and then there's a picture of just Eddie bleeding profusely in the back on the T-shirt. So they're definitely making money off this controversy.
Well, here's the thing. If Edwards is cool with it and Callahan obviously would be happy making a little bit of dough with it, then I guess it must not be that bad. The only thing I think that could have topped it is if Edwards, during his promo, started screeching around like Terry Funk, yelling, Callahan, my eye, you took my eye, you're yellow.
This is true. And then there's another spot that kind of maybe a little less controversial, but definitely just as gruesome. It was a part of the New Japan Cup. The first night, the main event, Michael Elgin versus Ishii, and they go up for an Elgin bomb off the top rope, which is a pretty difficult move to pull off. But as they're falling, Ishii just kind of keeps rotating, and instead of falling on his back, just kind of does that. Falls right on his head and looks to be right shoulder area. Immediately when this happens, you kind of see Michael Elgin break character a little bit and jump right on him, more not as much for a pin, but like as he's falling, he's asking him in English, "Are you okay?" And then he kind of goes for the pin, and then 1 or 2 moments later, the match is stopped. Ishii does progress forward in the short time that the match keeps going, but Have you seen this powerbomb, and what did you think of this powerbomb? Not necessarily like the Callahan spot using bats and things, but a part of the match.
I actually finished watching the match in its entirety minutes before we got on to do the podcast. So I have seen it, and I cringed completely when I saw the spot. I knew it was coming because I had heard about the spot itself, and it's brutal to watch. And it's funny because that we're talking about this after I've had to go back and watch some of these more gruesome looking injuries that have been in the history of the WWE. Immediately I thought of Joe Thurman and Vader when Vader broke his back in an enhancement talent match. But watching that match back in the day, you would have never even thought that anything had been out of the ordinary. It looked like a regular powerbomb. It's just Vader broke the guy's back. Now, clearly in this situation with Ishii and Elgin, it's a little bit different because Elgin immediately showed some remorse or at least some concern for his opponent there, and the match continued, if I'm not mistaken. So as of this time, unless another report comes out saying otherwise, I assume Ishii was fine. But I think that when you have two heavyweights like that who were going hard, and for two big guys, they were going hard at each other, the fatigue has to be considered a factor. And I realized that, it was a big show. New Japan Cup's a big deal, and they really wanted to go out there and impress the guys. But this seemed very similar to the Edwards situation, but like you said, just with their bodies instead of the bat. Is it preventable? Sure, of course, but only in the sense that maybe you shouldn't have done the spot. But if you were going to do the spot anyway, and it looks like it was just a freak accident. Like you said, Ishii didn't rotate his body all the way, boom, landed on his head. It actually reminds me of something that you had brought up when we were talking off microphone when we recorded yesterday, a very famous match from WrestleMania history. And since we're in WrestleMania season, I don't think it's inappropriate to bring it up. Remind our listeners what it was that you were telling me about.
WrestleMania 19, the main event, Kurt Angle versus Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar goes for a shooting star and just kind of his head falls in between Kurt Angle's chest and the mat. It looks really nasty, but like I was saying yesterday, that's my favorite WrestleMania match of all time, and I don't want to see anyone get hurt, but I would have to say that that's part of the lore, part of the legend, is the fact that it got a little too real right there.
100% agree with you on that, and there is something about these botches or these mistakes that end up almost eclipsing the matches, because if you talk to people about Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle in that main event of WrestleMania 19, that is the first thing they bring up. They don't talk about the fact that Angle and Brock had a fairly decent main event match with a lot of great amateur wrestling and technical influence. They talk about that shooting star press and how, oh my God, Brock almost broke his neck on it. You've seen it in video packages, and it goes to show you that some critics will say, wow, this kind of stuff would never happen in WWE, but the truth is it does happen in WWE, and not only does it happen, but they're more than happy to exploit it as long as they're not going to get sued for it. So I think it's really unfair for anybody to sit there and point fingers and say, these guys were doing it wrong, or these guys were being reckless about it. I would say no more or less than the top guys in the business. And when it comes to something like the Brock Lesnar shooting star press, sure, he might not have, maybe he could have avoided it by not doing it, but let's also remember that shooting star press was a move that Brock had done on a consistent basis in OVW. This wasn't a one-time thing that he was, let's just go out there to try and pop them. And the same thing could be said here for the Elgin situation, because the Elgin bomb is one of his signature moves, and he's done it off the top rope before. It's not like this was his first time trying it, so it simply was, in my opinion, a matter of a freak accident. It's an unfortunate situation that it happened. Hopefully, Ishii didn't suffer any permanent damage. As I said, I have not heard any other reports stating anything to the contrary, but let's just hope that he's okay, and hopefully everyone will be able to learn something from this. Brock Lesnar clearly learned from his experience at WrestleMania, because I don't think I've ever even seen him climb to the second rope since then.
Oh, I don't think he's done a handstand since. But that's the one thing that I was going to say is like that show, like the Elgin bomb, the bat, Brock Lesnar doing the shooting star those are mess ups from guys trying to push their limits. Whereas there's botches that have happened in WrestleMania main events, where Roman Reigns really couldn't pick up Undertaker for the tombstone and vice versa. That really kind of showed like maybe that this isn't them pushing their limits more so than playing it so safe that they're just dropping the ball. So I think that that's the difference between just a botch spot that's going to be kind of funny, that's going to make a botchamania, to a botch spot that's going to kind of be remembered in history for what it is, which is people showing the boundaries of their limits and really giving the crowd all they have.
Well, I would say when it comes to the Roman Reigns situation, I think it is the same situation. It's just a matter of, nothing spectacular may have come out of it, right? So let me pose a hypothetical. Had Roman Reigns picked up Undertaker and flawlessly executed that tombstone, but maybe was a little low and broke the Undertaker's neck, would we be sitting here talking about it in the same way that we do the Owen Hart botch of Steve Austin at SummerSlam 1997? Now, was that a case of like Owen couldn't get it right, or was it a case of no, we want something special for this, and it was just a freak accident gone awry? I think what the difference is between a lot of these is that there is an element of spectacle when you're talking about the Elgin botch, for example, as opposed to something like the Reigns and Taker spot from last year. It wasn't a spectacle. It was just a matter of, well, this didn't quite work out the way we had planned it, but hey, we're still going to go out there and try to do something. Whereas this one, it was like, well, it didn't work out the way that it happened, but man, did they ever get a great visual out of it? I mean, personally, I'll take the guys on Botchamania over the guys who potentially end up getting hurt any day of the week, but everyone's got their own opinion on that. And like I said, as long as the guys come out of the match after they leave that ring, if they're okay with it, it's not a big deal. But then and to kind of play devil's advocate here, you've got something on a flip side of that where you take a look at something like Goldberg kicking Bret Hart in the head at Starrcade 1999, which from all accounts, when you go back and watch it, looks fairly harmless in the sense that it looked like a very vicious super kick, but I would have never been able to tell you from looking at that, oh yeah, that ended Bret Hart's career right there. But it was more vicious than it meets the eye. So I think that a lot of it has to do with the visual spectacle of it, right? If we see something and immediately it makes us groan, or it makes us cringe, or it makes us kind of have to look away because it looks so vicious. Sometimes when guys do those moves, it's completely safe and it's just a fantastic blurring of the lines of reality. And sometimes something's gone wrong and someone might be actually hurt. But I think the reason that those botches tend to get remembered, whereas the other ones get made fun of, it's just a matter of spectacle.
That's true. I think that you're hitting on why we love wrestling to begin with. I appreciate you jumping on. For people that want to reach out to you on the internet, how can they reach you?
There's a couple of different ways that you can get a hold of the Wrasslun Show Network. First and foremost, our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Wrasslun Show. That's where you're going to find all the information, all of our social media posts. And, of course, if you want to hear our podcast, subscribe to us via SoundCloud. Do so at soundcloud.com/Wrasslun Show. And I'm going to spell that WRASSLUN Show. Of course, we're also available through iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. And you can find us on Twitter. Actually, if you give old JG Pro Wrestling here a follow, we're now friends. You can find us at The Wrasslun Show. We'd really appreciate you joining our own group of networkers who listen to us every single week. We've got podcasts running 6 days a week, and we want to keep them consistent. So come on out and have a listen.
There you have it, folks. Go check out The Wrasslun Show. Episode 86 would be a great place to start because I'm in it. I think that's kind of cool. Thanks for having me on. And if you want to talk to me, at JG Pro Wrestling on Twitter and SoundCloud.com/JG Pro Wrestling. And before we jump into this interview with Rich Laconi of ROHworld.com, I do have to say that there were a lot of things going on on my end with a snowstorm like we talked about in North Carolina coming. So my heat is going crazy, and also he's a school teacher actually. So there's I think one or two students run in during his break, and some bells go off. So bear with us, but it's a great conversation. Without further ado, here it is. How's it going, everybody? This is Jacob Grondy here for the Ole One Two Pro Wrestling Podcast. We're here with columnist of PW Ponderings, columnist of Ring of Honor or ROH World, the co-host of Running Wild Podcast, Rich Laconi. How you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
How's anytime. How's the weather in New York?
We're just recovering from like a nor'easter last week, which was weird because it dumped a little bit on the city, but then I'm a little north of the city now, so it dumped a lot more on us. And now I think we're in for like another little barrage, but it should be mini. I mean, it's typical in New York, so I kind of like the cold weather, so I'm used to it.
I hear you. I know it's typical in New York. I was talking to Cody Diener outside Toronto last episode, and he was talking about how you guys were getting feet of snow up there in the Northeast, and I was telling him how scared I was of snow, and then actually today in North Carolina it's snowing about 4 inches, and we were all terrified.
Yeah, we're kind of used to that, and I went to school up in Buffalo for a short while, so it was even crazier up there. Yeah, it would snow like 6 or 7 inches there, and people wouldn't bat an eye. You still had class, nothing was closed.
Oh, wow. But a place that it's probably never gets snow is Mexico City, and you had a chance to go down there and go to Arena Mexico recently. That's always been a dream of mine to go. What's the atmosphere like outside the arena going in during the show? Maybe just go through what you experienced.
Honestly, it's awesome. So I went to 3 shows, which I think also helps me like with my perspective in that I went to the Sunday show, I went to the Tuesday show, and I went to the Friday show, all at Arena Mexico. And the Friday show, look, when I went on Sunday, it was a lot of fun. I had a great time. I mean, it just seems like people are there to have fun. The Sunday show, I don't think there were as many tourists there as there were, like, say, Friday night, which dominated a lot of what was going on there. But Tuesday was a little bit more empty. But still, you have people not sitting on their hands. I feel like a lot of times, especially when I'm watching indie wrestling, I just feel like you're in you see these small venues and people are just waiting for something to happen, and it's felt like the people there were getting involved. Like picking having a rooting interest for each side. I mean, I'm not sure if that's because of the way they present the product. They're very clear. These are the Rudos. These are Technicos. Root for who you want to root for at this point. But Friday was absolutely insane. Ultimo Guerrero is so over down there that everybody was just behind him. And you had a whole new wrinkle to the Ingobernables down there. And at the end of that last match, people were chucking money into the ring, which I had heard it's something that they do, but I'd never seen myself. So it's just, I guess the best way to describe it is like other wrestling shows that I've gone to, and they have their highs and lows, but I picture it as like a mid-season baseball game. If it's a really good game, people get up for it, but if they're not really invested, they're like, hey, this is only game 101. It doesn't really matter. Where I felt like Arena Mexico was like a playoff game every single game, every time you were there.
That's a good way to put it. Do you think that we're kind of we're getting oversaturated with the stuff we get in America?
I think we're oversaturated, but I also think it's part of I think once kayfabe kind of came out and that curtain was pulled back, I think that a lot of people, we became critics more. And I think we kind of we missed that moment where everybody's just really having fun and yelling and rooting for somebody, because the audience is just as important in some respects to a wrestling match being successful as the workers in the ring. Because when you have a really hot crowd, you can see the wrestlers get more energized by it. They get more into it, and then the crowd gets more into it, and everybody's having the optimal time. And I think that in the United States, we're becoming so critical of things, and we don't just go to root. Like, even if you go somewhere and you don't my thing is that I've gotten to a point where if I don't know who's wrestling in a match, I watch to see who might be wrestling as the heel, and then I'll boo that heel, and I'll cheer for the face. Nothing's worse than like the comeback when nobody cares. Oh. And I think that's part of it. I think in Mexico, I think the fans are just like, hey, I'm here to root, cheer, maybe have a beer and have a good time.
Yeah, I hear that. And a lot of what you mentioned was nothing's worse than seeing that babyface fiery comeback to like a lackluster reaction. And we get that a lot with 205 Live, being after SmackDown, maybe half full arenas. I host a show called 205 Jive, and we get that a lot. But ROH, a company that you cover heavily, just had their 16th anniversary show with former Cruiserweight champion Austin Aries. I was just wondering, he's now the Impact champion coming into Ring of Honor. What do you think that means for a show and a brand like 205 Live, showing pretty much point blank that this guy is a star everywhere, but we couldn't make him a star in this format?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how much it speaks to 205 Live, and I don't know how much it also speaks to this idea that I think WWE is almost overflowing with so much talent, and I wonder, how many guys said, I want to go to WWE and be in the mid card? And I think part of it's role playing. I think, we have a lot of these guys. I'm not saying that our Aries doesn't deserve to be pushed further because he's a great talent. But when you have so many talents, somebody has to be okay with not being on top. And I think what's happening to the fans, especially of independent wrestling, is we watch these guys come into WWE and we're like, hey, that's my guy. That's the guy that I've been watching at this place and this place. I saw him here when there were only 40 people in the place. And then they see that they're being quote unquote misused in WWE and they're upset by it. But I think we have to really remember that back in the day, everybody had their spot. And I think when somebody is comfortable with their spot, that's okay. I think the fans aren't okay with certain people being in a spot that's not, very elevated. Aries, it was, interesting because they brought him into NXT and then they brought him to 205. And I think it was a little weird that he ended up leaving to me, because what do you really aspire to? I mean, once you're on 205 Live, and I think it's going to be a much better show, but it's not the main focus of WWE. And I think that's what happens with some of our indie darlings make it to WWE. Look at Hero. There are tons of people that are not happy with the position Hero had. You thought he had such a killer year, and he left WWE, made himself one of the greatest performers on the independent scene during the time period, then gets signed back, and now he's basically like a player coach. And he might be very happy with that, but I know there are tons of people who watch his matches who are like, I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah, for sure. You see that a lot with the Hideo Itami as well, brought in with a lot of fanfare and then kind of bounced around in NXT, got injured, and then now he's on 205 Live, and he's kind of in the same boat he was in NXT. They don't really know what to do with him.
Hopefully the tag team, there's rumor of the Cruiserweight tag team titles coming back. That might be interesting. But I think at the end of the day, 205 Live is essentially the fourth show.
What are your thoughts on the controversial Young Bucks?
I mean, I think I think they're very entertaining. And I think that, I know some people take it seriously and some people feel like, that they ruined the business and things like this, and because of just like the spot fests or things like that. I think that they've proven with being the elite that they're real entertainers. And that's why we pay money to go watch wrestling. You're not watching to see who's actually going to win and who's actually going to lose. We do, but really we're there to be entertained, because that's the whole point behind it. And I think the Young Bucks are fantastic at doing that. I got a chance to talk to them actually right before Manhattan Mayhem, and just talk about being the elite and what they've been doing there. I think that Matt lately with this whole angle or the story, this continuing story, that his back has been really hurt. I really think it's shown some people a side of them with the selling and the continuity of storyline that we maybe haven't seen before. But if you want to talk about continuity of storyline, what they're doing of Being the Elite is, let's be honest here, I would say that their work on Being the Elite did more to put people over in Ring of Honor and New Japan than both of those companies were doing without the Young Bucks.
Oh, for sure. That is one thing that I've noticed with all their matches is they get lots of people involved. For sure. So, and you're a contributor on ROH World. You do the Running Wild podcast and everything. But I'm going to go all the way back here. I'm going to ask you, what was your first memory of professional wrestling? Maybe as a kid or teenager, or do you remember a first match or first promo?
This is really tough. I mean, I can tell you that I think my first live event was somewhere, I think it was like 1993 at the Garden. I had seen, I think it's September 9th, 1992 or something like that. I know it's random, but I had actually looked that up because I saw somebody tweet a question like that. And I found the show because I remember Adam Bomb being there.
Oh.
In terms of, it's hard for me to tell you when I can remember because I've been watching wrestling for that long. I can remember very distinctly WrestleMania 8. And looking back on it, I actually kind of hate this moment. But WrestleMania 8, when the Warrior comes out to save Hogan from getting beat down by Justice and Papa Shango, or being shocked. I couldn't believe that Miss Elizabeth actually hung out with Ric Flair by the pool and all those pictures in WWF magazine, and then finding out that they were all doctored photos, and it probably only hit me a year ago that the photos weren't doctored or photoshopped, that they just had both guys there taking the shots. But, it was so part of my childhood that was something that occurred that it was a pretty big deal. So I've really liked wrestling ever since I can remember. Having my wrestling buddies and all my toys and dragging my dad to shows, and it's been it sounds weird, but it's something that's always been with me, and there's no off season, even if I've heard people say like, oh, like this team, I've always rooted for them because they've kind of always been there for me. But wrestling is literally there for you 365 days a year if you want it to be there.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you. I honestly can't remember my very first wrestling memory on TV or anything, but there is videotape of me being like 1 year old, and I have a Ron Simmons action figure, and he is totally beating up the plastic that he came in. So I guess I was a fan from day one, just like you. But you mentioned Adam Bomb. Were you a big Adam Bomb fan?
I mean, as a kid, yeah, because at this point I don't think I had been clued into kayfabe at all. So this guy's got yellow eyes and he's from 3 Mile Island. He was definitely a very Vince character in that he was kind of ridiculous. I mean, his name is Adam Bomb. It's just so much ridiculousness in there, but at the same time, I was young and I kind of enjoyed that. And I know that because of the Attitude Era, we kind of all are conditioned to the fact that these caricatures of people are wrong. But I mean, it's such a performance art. It's such an over the top performance that I don't mind a character like that. Like, I'm really enjoying Braun Strowman now, and it's because he's absurd. He's been pushing over ambulances and tractor trailers and holding cars up last week so that Elias couldn't drive away. So he's so absurd and larger than life that I think that's kind of why I've been so into CMLL, because, granted, everybody can, especially if it's the promotion you've been watching a long time, you can find something wrong with it. But I like that over the top, because if at this point I understand that it's not really a competitive contest, then I'm going to attach to the characters that appeal to me the most. And not because they're real, because, listen, the real world, and, you just turn on the news, 5 minutes in, you're going to be super depressed. That's not what I want. I want to turn on wrestling and I want to have an enjoyable experience. And I think, characters like Adam Bomb, characters like Braun Strowman, they're the ones that really get that reaction out of people.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And we're approaching a WrestleMania. I mean, Fastlane is over. We're now knee deep in WrestleMania season. But a character like Braun Strowman, where you and I both like, doesn't have a clear cut match. Where do you see Braun at WrestleMania?
I mean, they could, the rumor was that they were kind of holding him in a circling pattern to see what happens with Roman Reigns, and I guess to have an out. I'm not sure if I really believe that. I mean, part of that was linked to the idea that Roman was going to be named as somebody who's taking steroids, and I think last week it came out that it was the wrong Reigns, that they were talking about Luther Reigns or something like that.
I saw that.
So I'm not even sure if they were really ever holding him in that pattern. I mean, I think I could see him doing something with Elias. I could see him in the Andre Battle Royal. I mean, it's a little weird that's not solidified, and we're talking on Monday, so I'm actually hoping that tonight we see a clearer path. But I wouldn't mind, as long as it's not pre-show, I wouldn't mind a short, like you could do an 8-minute match with Elias and Strowman and have that be good and still have tons of show left.
That's true. Fair point. Are you looking forward to this Mania at all? Is any match kind of grabbing your interest, just like Adam Bomb did as a kid?
Let's see. I mean, at this point, I kind of just want to see the resolution of Roman and Brock. I mean, they've worked really hard to tell this story, and they've been building it for quite a while. So, you have the clash of, two guys who have beat The Undertaker. I think that'll be a good match. I think they're going to deliver there. I'll tell you the truth. I mean, I get a little intimidated almost by WrestleMania week because of the coverage that I'll be doing over for ROH World and PW Ponderings. So look, there's so much wrestling going on that week, it gets overwhelming. And truthfully, one of the things that I think I find a little distressing at times is the length. Sorry, apparently it's a little crazy about my job now. But it's the stamina to be able to watch the show. I actually like watching it at home better because you can kind of take a break and not be there. I haven't been to a WrestleMania since I want to say 29. That was the last one I went to. That was actually over here in Jersey, and there are rumors flying around that I will be back in the same arena, the MetLife Stadium, and next year, and it's going to present me with an issue because just between the pre-show and everything, and you call it the pre-show, but you still have matches on it, and these things turn out to be like 7 hours sometimes, so it's a little tiring. But at the same time, it's WrestleMania. I'm in the middle of rewatching every WrestleMania until the next one. So I think I'm at 19 right now. Oh. So I still got a couple to go, but I still have some time. I still have about a month. But it's definitely a time of year that, no matter how negative I can get about the product sometimes, and even talking about the length, when Mania Day comes, I'm very excited. Now we have TakeOver before, which it seems that whenever you have a big four, the TakeOver almost outshines it in many ways. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
I hear that. You mentioned, WrestleMania 19. That's my personal favorite WrestleMania. Are you at the Brock Angle match yet?
Yeah. So 19 was, I think it was really interesting. I mean, what I liked about 19 and 20 was those happened before, like, it really got too long, and I feel like they had, the builds were better. They wouldn't span just one pay-per-view month. They would go much, much further, and I think that's what's missing a little bit from the current Manias is, okay, you have the Brock and Roman build up, but a lot of the other matches, and I guess Knock and AJ to an extent, but again, look, because of Fastlane, we had to solidify that AJ was going to be the champion. When the truth is, you knew that AJ was going to be, once Nakamura won, you kind of knew it was going to be AJ Nakamura. That's the money match there. Mm. So I would have almost rather just seen the build for that for a couple of months instead of this idea that AJ was actually going to lose it.
That I can see that totally. So beyond the Roman match, beyond AJ Nakamura, do you think that there's a solid undercard match that you're excited for this year at Mania?
I'm really hoping the tag team match is strong. I think the Usos deserve to be showcased. It seems now that they're going to, I hope it's not it looks like it might be a triple threat with the Bludgeon Brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not really looking at that. But I don't know how you remove the Bludgeon Brothers after what they did at Fastlane, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm probably most looking forward to the IC title match, and it looks like it's going to be Miz versus Balor versus Seth Rollins. You know, and Miz has been fantastic. I mean, I think everyone's kind of gotten there. And Rollins, after that crazy gauntlet match, I mean, he's proven that he's up there, and, you know, I don't think anyone would disagree in saying that Balor is a fantastic talent. So if they give those guys a good amount of time, that might actually be the best match on the entire card.
Wow, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's definitely a sleeper match for me. I don't know if it's going to be Knock AJ. I think they're going to go out there and try to steal the show.
I might get some flack from some people listening to this, but I don't know if I've seen the Knock that we remember from Knock versus AJ in WWE yet. Hopefully this brings it out, but I don't know if I've seen that must-see match with Knock since he's been in WWE. At least not compared to his previous work.
No, yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, I know what you mean there. But I did like his match with Rusev at Fastlane.
Yeah, that's just a little tough also, because I really liked the match. I thought it was really good. I think they've pushed Rusev to a point, and he's been so wildly popular that I'm surprised that they're not using that more. And, you know, just sometimes it feels like if a guy gets over without WWE doing it on purpose, they don't push them. They're like, no, we didn't want you to get over right now, so quiet down. And I think that makes it difficult when you've been treating Rusev more like comedy than anything else. Then I think it kind of hurts a match like that.
Yeah, I totally agree there. But thanks for jumping on the show. I really enjoyed having you on, Rich. If people wanted to reach out to you, talk about CMLL, talk about Ring of Honor, where can they reach you at on the internet?
Oh, sure. They can reach me on, I'm usually best on Twitter, so it's Rich_LACONI. And you guys can always catch my work over at ROHworld.com and pwpopdrinks.com.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.